Salute is a program for and about men and women who have served our country. Our program includes news about the laws that affect veterans, information on benefits and services, and news from veterans organizations. And now, our host, Bob Peters.
Hello and welcome to Salute. I'm your host, Bob Peters, and with me is the gentleman, Mr. Dan Keel, who is a Tuskegee Airman. You live up in Claremont now, am I correct?
That is correct.
Well, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure having you here. Can you tell us a little about yourself? You told me off camera that you weren't born here, right?
Yes, I was born in Mineola, New York, moved to Massachusetts when I was 1 year old, went to school in Massachusetts, graduated from high school in 1941. From there, I went to Northeastern University, where I was studying aeronautical engineering. I was drafted in the Armed Forces in August. The draft board told me to report at August, and I took the physical. As I said, took the physical. The man saw I was black. The first thing he said was Navy, and I told him I didn't want to go in the Navy because the water made me seasick. But he said he didn't care what the water did to me.
No,
he put me there anyhow. But I had a letter that showed him that I had taken an exam before I was drafted, saying I could go in the Air Force if I was drafted or volunteered, and that's where I intended to go. He read the letter, made a few notes, gave me a dirty look and told me to go on home. He'd notify me in a couple of days where I was going. A couple of weeks later, I was told I was scheduled to go into the Air Force, but before I could go to Tuskegee, to train to become a pilot, I had to go to 2 months of basic training at Keesler Field, Mississippi. At the end of 2 months of basic training at Keesler, Mississippi, we were told we had to take another exam before we could go to Tuskegee. It was a two-part exam. The first part of the exam was called a psychological test. It was a multiple choice test, and it lasted 8 hours. The second part of the test wasn't bad at all. It was called a psychometric test. It only lasted 4 hours. 300 of us took it, and they only took 10%. That was seemed like the Air Force number. No, everything was 10% as far as blacks was concerned. I was fortunate to be one of the 10%. And from there, we were sent to Tuskegee for 3 months of academic training. That's what they call it. I call it just a review of reading, writing, and arithmetic. But at the end of 6 weeks, they told us that our studies are going to be cut in half. The program is cut in half, and we're being sent to the Army Air Base for 2 months of pre-flight training. At the end of 2 months of pre-flight training, they told us they're going to send us to navigation school. We all objected because we wanted to be pilots. Didn't do us any good anyhow. 6 months later, when I graduated from navigation school, incidentally, we were sent to Hondo, Texas, to train to become navigators. There were 27 of us. And when I got my navigator wings, I was appointed a flight officer instead of being commissioned a second lieutenant. I was very disappointed, and I told my former instructor so. He told me not to worry. The planes the Negroes are flying in Gardner Field are medium bombers, and that the medium bombers required that the navigator be a bombardier. And all I had to do was maintain an 85 average, and I automatically became a second lieutenant. We arrived at Midland Army Air Base in the middle of September of '44. Unfortunately for us, we were the first black group of officers to set foot on Midland Army Air Base. As soon as we gotten off the train, an Army officer walked up to us and told us that he was Lieutenant Colonel Phelps, and that Lieutenant Colonel Phelps, was the deputy commander of Midland Army Air Base, and that Lieutenant Colonel Phelps, was born in Texas, he was raised in Texas, he expected to die in Texas. And if we Negroes didn't know our place while we were in his state of Texas, he spelled it out for us. 1, we could not eat in the officers' mess. 2, we could not go to the officers' club. 3, if we went to the base theater, we could not sit in the officers' section. And 4, if you go to town, you had to ride the back of the bus. I knew I was in trouble as soon as he said that. 12 o'clock sharp, we went to the cadet mess hall to get our noonday meal. Meals back in those days were called breakfast, dinner, and supper. 12:05, 10, 15, 20 minutes, no food. But we observed that every time a group of white cadets came in, they were promptly fed. After the last group had come in and been fed, the mess sergeant and his crew stopped bringing us officers what was left of the food. We were so angry, we told the mess sergeant and his crew to take the food they was bringing us and shove it. Walked over to the officers' mess hall and demanded that we be fed. The next morning after breakfast, Phelps and his crew came over demanding to know why we had disobeyed his order by not eating in the cadet mess hall. When we told him what had taken place, he told us that excuse was not good enough for him, and for disobeying his orders, he was going to have each and every one of us court-martialed.
Wow.
Well, what we did then, we wrote a letter to the Southwest Commanding General. A few days later, the general was on the base, and he told the commanding officers and all the, well, I got to go back further than that. We wrote the letter and sent it to the commanding general. We sent it airmail special delivery, because we knew if we sent it through channels, it would have never gotten to the general. A few days after we sent the letter, a group of white officers came over our quarters and told us that the general was on the base, and he had ordered every white officer to meet with him in the base theater to discuss our situation. And they would come back and give us a report what took place after the meeting. About an hour or so later, the same group came back and gave us a report what had taken place. After all the white officers had assembled in the theater, the general threw out the question, how should we Negroes be treated? And we were told the discussion became so heated, a fist fight broke out amongst some of the white officers in the base theater. And the only way the general was able to quell the melee was by having the national anthem played. After order was restored in the base theater, he told the officers that although we were Negroes, we were officers in the United States Army Air Force, and being officers in the United States Air Force, we will be treated with the same respect and dignity of any other officer off that base.
As well it should be.
Walked off the podium, followed by the base commander. As soon as the door had closed on the two, Phelps, before dismissing officers, said he would get even those Negroes as the last thing he ever did. Fortunately, well, let's say about 70 years later, over 20 years, some of my classmates been trying to find that letter we had sent to the commanding general, to no avail. But unfortunately, a month ago, my daughter's side, the one that just talking to my wife just now, decided she was going to try to find that letter. And within 13 days, with a dedicated librarian in the Library of Congress, she was able to locate the letter on microfilm. And she sent me a copy of the letter. And they also sent her a copy of the excuses the Army brass used and treated us in the manner we were treated. The letter we sent to the Southwestern Commanding General, I was surprised, went all the way up to General Arnold, the head of the command, and he was furious. And one of the excuses that the Army brass used for our treatment was that we didn't send the letter through channels. Now, you know as well as I do, if we had sent that letter through channel, they never would have gotten it.
Right, somebody just...
And that was one of their biggest gripes. And another gripe was they were renovating the hall, and they was doing this and doing that, the other. They were furious. But that was it. A couple of weeks later, if you want to know more, Phelps tried to have me and 5 of my classmates again court-martialed. Again, he failed. 2 weeks.
Let me guess, he wasn't on your Christmas list, was he?
During my time there, he tried to have me court-martialed twice. He tried to have me sent overseas once, and he tried to have me thrown out pilot training twice. I was one of 3 triple-rated flying officers, black flying officers in the entire United States Army Air Force. There was over 900 pilots. There were approximately 250 navigators and bombardiers. And there was only 3 of us that were navigators, bombardiers, and pilots.
Wow, 3 hats. You wear all 3 hats, huh?
Because the reason why he couldn't send us overseas, because there were no black bomber pilots overseas. And number two, there's nowhere in hell where the Army going to let a black navigator tell a white pilot where to go. So that's the reason why we were not sent overseas as navigators.
Thank God things have changed, huh?
And it was racism that made me triple rated. For the simple reason, when our class got back up to Godman Field, where the Negro pilots were in transition training, and the reason why they were still there, because the commanding officer of Godman Field was a racist, and his intermediate boss was a racist. So when we arrived at Godman Field to join them, they realized they didn't have enough pilots to accommodate all us navigators. So that's why my class was sent back to Tuskegee to train to become pilots. There were 27 of us when we arrived at Tuskegee Army Air Base. When we graduated, there was only 3 of us left. Phelps had seen to it that 24 of us was thrown out of pilot training. Phelps, as a matter of fact, tried to have me thrown out of pilot training within 4 days of graduation.
Well.
Because, you want to know a little more?
Well, remember, it's a family show.
Oh, well, let's see now. When we arrived at Tuskegee to train to become pilots, I said there were 27 of us. I knew when we were sent to Tuskegee, I had it made. It was a black base, black everything. So I knew I had it made. Second week on the base, when I walked into my AI-NI class, we saw 10 X's up on the board. Now you must remember that all primary training done back in the days was done by civilians, not Army personnel. All primary training was done by civilian personnel.
Yeah, because all the others were were involved in the war.
That's right. And our second week, when we arrived at Tuskegee Army Air Base at our AI-NI class, we saw 10 X's up on the board. When our instructor walked in, who was black and a civilian, said, "Good morning." He said, "You see those 10 X's up on the board?" I said, "Yep. Come Friday, 10 of you men will no longer be in this class." We were struck by his remarks. Then we all said in unison, "Lieutenant Colonel Phelps, that rascal tentacles had followed us over 2,000 miles. Come Friday, 10 of us were thrown out of pilot training." I topped the list.
Excuse me, what was the reason they threw you guys out? What did they say?
We never know.
Oh, yours is not the reason why.
That's the reason why. All we know is that come Friday, 10 of us were thrown out, and the reason why we knew it was Lieutenant Phelps had a hand in it, because the 10 of us was thrown out were the first 10 signatures on the letter we sent to the commanding general when he tried to have us court-martialed the first time. Now, it couldn't be a coincidence that this black civilian would know whose 10 first signatures was on that letter sent to the Southwestern Command. So it had to be Lieutenant Colonel Phelps.
Yeah.
Well, we wrote a letter to the Southeastern Commanding General.
Oh, boy.
A couple of days later, he was on the base. And after meeting with a delegation from our class, the 10 of us that was thrown out of pilot training was placed back in the program, and the instructor was fired. Until the day, I haven't been able to figure out what a lieutenant colonel 2,000 miles away could offer a black civilian to have so many of us thrown out of pilot training. But while this was going on, I was surprised to see that 1/3 of my classmates were told they couldn't solo the plane, and they required 4 to 6 hours, and was promptly sent back to Godman Field. At the end of lower primary, half my classmates had been thrown out of primary training. At the end of upper primary, 2/3 of my classmates had been thrown out of pilot training. We started off with 27 in my group, and we finished upper primary, there were only 9 of us left. Just before we entered basic flight training, we were told 2 things. One, all training done in basic and advanced was done by Army personnel. And a few of the instructors were not very friendly. As a matter of fact, we had one instructor who was proud of his record of never ever passing anyone from basic to advanced or advanced to graduation. So we knew whoever got him as an instructor wasn't going to make it.
Yeah.
And wherein each instructor was given 3 men to train in basic and 3 men to train in advanced, 6 men going through the classes were not going to make it, no matter what. The second thing we were told, that the planes that everyone had trained in before we became promoted to basic flight training were not going to be used anymore. The planes that we would have to learn how to fly in basic were the planes that everybody before us learned how to fly in advance. Now, to me, that was a godsend, for the simple reason the Army brass at that time made a black returned 99th captain and instructor, and I and 2 of my classmates were his first pupil. You guessed it, at the end of basic flight training, we were the only 3 left in my group. The other 6, we figured Phelps had a hand in getting rid of the other 6. Just before we entered advanced flight training, we were told the flight game had changed one more time. The planes that twin-engine students had learned how to fly in advanced flight training, the AT-10s, were no longer going to be used. The planes that the multi-engine student would have to learn how to fly would be the B-25 bombers. Fighter pilots would be trained to fly the P-40 fighter planes. Now, when we went down on the flight line, we saw several B-25s lined up, ready for the twin-engine student to fly. But there were no P-40s for single-engine students to fly. That meant that single-engine students would have the same instructors in advance they had in basic. But the twin-engine instructors that taught the students how to fly the AT-10 did not qualify to teach them how to fly the B-25. That meant outside instructors had to be brought in. Just before we entered advanced flight training, my instructor told Lindsay and Williams, my 2 remaining classmates in my group, that they were going to be trained to be bomber pilots. I was going to be trained to be a fighter pilot. As soon as my instructor told me I was going to be trained to be a fighter pilot, I knew my chances of getting my wings ran anywhere between slim to none, with Phelps on my back. And I told my instructor so. And my instructor told me he didn't make the assignments, he just carried them out. And I told him that may be true, but I would appreciate it very much if he would have me transferred from fighter to bomber. And I gave him my reason for wanting to do so. And a couple hours later, he came back and told me my wish had been granted. And to make sure there was no hanky-panky going on in advanced flight training, all 3 of us would have the same instructor. And thankful for us, he made sure that we got an instructor that wasn't prejudiced. He was very tough, but he was fair. 2.5 weeks before I graduated, all I had to do to earn my pilot wings was to pass my cross-country instrument flight check and pass my AINI test. The day before I was to take my cross-country instrument flight check, I developed a wicked cold. My throat was so raw I couldn't hardly swallow. A couple of my former classmates who were still on the base, because at that time, I don't know whether you heard of the Freeman Mutiny or not, there was a mutiny going on at Freeman Field in Indiana over the same reasons why we had it at San Antonio. And they weren't sent up there because they didn't want to fuel the mutiny. And one of them suggested to me the best way to get rid of my sore throat was to take a good shot of Alabama moonshine. I took a good shot of Alabama moonshine and spent the next 7 days in the hospital. At the end of 7 days, I was able to talk my way out of the hospital, and I went up to my instructor and told him that I was ready to take my instrument flight check. And he told me, sorry, all flight checks for my class had been completed, and I would have to wait till the next class came along, take my flight check. I told him I didn't want to wait till the next class came along. I wanted to take it now, and I gave him my reasons for wanting to do so. Friday afternoon, my instructor came up to me and said, Dan, you know Saturdays and Sundays are my day off. I said, yes, sir, I know that. I tell you what, he said, the football team here at the base is going to play the Marines down at Camp Lejeune this coming Sunday. Now, he said, if you will fly the team equipment down to Camp Lejeune tomorrow morning, I will fly down with you as your co-pilot. And on the way back, I will give you your flight test. I flew a perfect mission down and a perfect mission back. As soon as I got back, I went over and spoke to my returning classmate and gave him the good news I told him this coming Monday morning, a week coming Monday morning, I'll be a pilot and I'll be a second lieutenant. And one of my classmates said, not so fast. I said, what's the problem now? There's a rumor going around that said that Robinette, who's a black second lieutenant, if he fails you in AINI, he will be promoted to a first lieutenant. I said, you gotta be kidding. Monday morning after we took the test, my two remaining classmates and I compared notes, and I came to the conclusion, if I fail, they fail. We all had just about the same answers. Tuesday when we went in to get our test scores, they got their marks first, and their test was marks somewhere between 96 and 100. I knew I defeated Phelps one more time. After all the papers was passed out, I looked up at my instructor, where was my test paper? He said, somehow or other he managed to lose it. And by losing it, I would have to take a makeup test. And if I passed the makeup test, the highest mark I could get would be a 70. Now, I will not repeat to you what I think I said to Robinette. Went in Wednesday, took the makeup test. I was so mad, I didn't care what I put down on that test paper. But I guess I must have put down the right answers, because they took one look at my test paper and said, you passed, your mark is a 70. Now, the only reason why I think he passed me, because he knew what had happened to the instructor that had pulled that stunt on us in primary. Well, factoring the 70 into the 92, because the AINI test carried the lowest value of any of our academic marks, I came up with an 89. Friday afternoon, I was told to report to the administration building to sign my records. When I was given my flight record, it said very satisfactory. I signed it. When I was given my academic record, I was surprised the sheet was blank. I looked at the man handed this. I said, this form is blank. You don't expect me to sign it, do you? He said, you want your wings this coming Monday morning? Certainly, I said. Then you better sign this blank form, because if you don't sign it, I can assure you, you will not be receiving your wing this coming Monday morning. I signed a blank form, and Monday morning, when it came around, I became the first triple-rated flight officer in the entire United States Army Air Force. A couple of weeks later, Robinette was given his first lieutenant bars. Two things I learned while I was in the armed service back then. One, not all white people are racist, and two, not all black people got one's best interests at heart.
Well,
any questions?
Well, I hate to say it, we got 6 minutes left. I do have a couple of questions. One, I asked you about the Red Tail, because that's the big movie that's coming out.
Well, the Red Tails.
And you know, what is the significance?
Well, the Red Tails was an identification mark, identification purposes. All different squadrons had different marks or symbols on their tails. And the reason for that was to make sure if I'm in the red tail and I see a yellow tail, I knew that was part of our organization. And if I saw a black tail, and if they didn't have those marks on it, I was told to shoot you down. So you had to have some kind of identification, and we all knew what the identifications were. So that way, we didn't accidentally shoot each other, fight each other.
How many guys would you say, how many men went through to become Tuskegee Airmen? How many were there? You got any idea? And well, I know you guys get together still, right?
Well, we have a get together once a year, usually in August. The total number of pilots were 900 plus, about 950, 975. I think looking it up, I think it was 250 Navigator bombardiers, and I think maybe a 50, 60 bombardiers. Matter of fact, at the get-together at Daytona this past couple of days ago, a gentleman walked up to me and gave me his card, and it said he was a retired medical doctor. And during World War II, he was a bombardier on the B-17 Flying Fortress. And he said the Red Tails were his escorts. It says a little thing not known, that one day they got a directive that the Red Tails were no longer going to be the escorts. And they say on their base, they almost had a riot and a mutiny. And it took several phone calls between their base commander and higher ups before they resolved it that the Tuskegee Airmen would continue being their fighter protection. And they said each mission they went on, every one of their bombers came back.
Yeah, I know of it.
I was
yeah.
surprised that said very few people know that they almost had a riot and a mutiny when they told that they weren't going to be protected by the Tuskegee Airmen.
And did you say you were a bombardier? Did you use the Norton?
Yes, I trained in Northern Bomb
Do you know the Norton was made in Connecticut?
No,
Yeah.
I don't. Well,
Yeah.
no.
They got one. I saw one in a museum.
Oh, no, that's right.
there, yeah.
And our orders was that we were shot down. The first thing we were supposed to do, take out 45 and shoot the bomb site so that the enemy wouldn't be able to get...
Yeah, it was top secret at that time.
Top secret at the time. That's right.
So, you know, we're running out of time, and I want to, you know, I tell you, I'm fascinated. I could listen for another hour. We only have a half-hour show. So, you stayed with the bombers.
That's right.
And then when did you leave the service?
I left the service in 1946. And the main reason why I didn't stay in, because I figured that maybe one day Phelps might be able to get even with me. And I didn't want to take any chance that I would do something that maybe would give him a real reason for having me court-martialed. So when the opportunity presented itself, matter of fact, I was practically one of the first ones out. Because when the opportunity presented itself, I got out because of Phelps. A lot of my classmates, quite a few stayed in, and practically all of them retired lieutenant colonels,
Great.
generals, whatnot.
Yeah.
My class that went through Hondo Air Army for training to be navigators had one of the highest academic and flight records of any class that went through. I didn't know that until I read a book on the history of Hondo. 65 years later.
Yeah.
That's when I was told that. Yeah, we were pretty smart, but we were lucky. We all weren't lucky, but I mean, 3 of us were lucky that we made it all the way, and we were lucky that we got through bombardiering training.
Well, I like to think you earned it. You know what I mean? It may be you may think luck, but I think you earned it, and you earned everything you got. And I have a lot of respect for you and the rest of the Tuskegee Airmen. And I'm glad you came on the show, you know, to kind of enlighten us a little bit. But when you got out, what did you do? Did you in a career somewhere?
Well, I went back to electrical engineering, and I stayed in the electrical field. One thing I like to tell you, did you see the Red Tails?
I saw one. I didn't see this latest one, but I remember back a while, a few years back.
You saw the first, but this last one, all it tells you is what took place after we became pilots and after we were allowed into combat. It showed what we could do and what we accomplished and what we did. The first one you saw gave you a little background as to what we went through before.
The struggle you had to go through to end.
That's right, before we
to be accepted.
Because as I said before, after the war, I gave up aeronautical engineering because I didn't see any future in it. Because the first thing I did when I got out of the service, I got my commercial pilot license. Although I knew it wouldn't do me any good, but it was just good to have it. And that was it. And I went to field electrical engineering, and I became an electrical contractor, and that's what I did until I retired in 1998.
Well, Dan, I thank you for what you've done for our country. I hate to tell you this, but I am out of time.
That's all right.
You know, and it was a pleasure meeting you.
All right.
So to all our veterans out there, active military and their families, we salute you for what you do. Till next time. We are now entering our 3rd year salute here at Lakefront TV. We've had many great guests and veterans organizations share their stories with us. We'd like to hear from you too. If you're a veteran or a veterans organization, Lake Sumter counties, please give us a call. Lakefront TV can be seen all over Lake County and the villages and worldwide at lakefronttv.com.